When you think about Queen Mary I, it's probably Antonis Mor's famous portrait of her that instantly pops into your head. Or maybe it's the stunning image of Mary in her 20s on display at the National Portrait Gallery. The truth, however, is that Mary is depicted in literally hundreds of different images, from portraits and sketches to legal documents and, of course, coinage. To discuss Mary's imagery with me, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr Peter Stiffell onto the podcast. Peter is an expert in the story of Queen Mary I and has catalogued all known images of her, enabling him to gain incredible insight into the life of the very first Queen Regnant in English history. Welcome back to the Tudor Chest podcast, episode 74, The Imagery of Queen Mary I with Dr Peter Stiffell. Welcome to the Tudor Chest podcast, Dr Peter Stiffell. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Adam. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So we are here today to talk about your favourite subject, Queen Mary I, and her many images and the imagery around her. Before we get into that, though, just a few questions to get to know you a bit better. It's your first time on the podcast. So can you provide me with a short introduction into your background, so where you grew up and what you now do full-time?
Yeah, so I'm obviously Dr Peter Stiffell. I did my bachelor's in Chichester, so it was lovely down south. Then I came back to Kent to do my master's and PhD in Canterbury. Kent lad through and through. I've always loved Tudors, which is sort of what got me into it. You know, I love kings, queens, that sort of thing. It's probably because my nan used to take us to London all the time. Always took us to the palace. You know, we'd look through the gates. Like, oh, can we see the Queen there or something? And plus, she used to look like the Queen, so we used to always tease the tourists. So I'm currently just a full-time historian, just ploughing away, writing articles and, bits and bobs.
So you've kind of answered my second question. I was going to ask you what sparked your passion for Tudor history. So would you say it was your grandmother?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, she always looked like the Queen. So we used to always go to London and the tourists used to think it was her. And obviously we played along with it. Yeah, I mean, I've always liked kings and queens, and obviously we learned about the Tudors at school.
Yeah. And
then you actually realise once you start uni, everything that you learned at school was wrong. Yeah, I mean, it's great,
Yes, in particular, the way that your favourite has been portrayed, you learn very differently once you actually start.
Yeah, yes, you really do. It's honestly, it's terrible. It needs to be rewritten.
So, if you could pick a single moment from history to go back and witness, what would it be? Although I think I can probably guess.
You can probably guess. It would have to be Mary's coronation. Actually being in Westminster Abbey, witnessing history. I mean, I'd just go completely fangirled. I wouldn't be able to keep my composure at all. I'd start crying and everything. I can just imagine being Stephen Gardiner, having the imperial crown and placing it on her head. I mean, she must have been absolutely terrified.
Well, also because it was the first. We had Empress Matilda, we had Lady Jane Grey. Neither made it to a coronation, so this was a true first, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they basically tried to, there was a lot of controversy over the whole thing. How do you crown a queen who's also king? What does she wear? For instance, I think she changes her outfit 3, 4, 5 times because obviously different symbolism for everything. And obviously it must have been a bit awkward for Stephen Gardiner to anoint her with the holy oil because you've obviously not just got the face and the arms, it's the breast as well. So it's like,
yeah,
he must have been quite scared to do it.
And to answer what I said, I knew that's what you were going to say. I thought he'll definitely say Mary's coronation.
My reputation precedes me.
Yes, and mine would be Anne Boleyn's coronation, so my reputation precedes me as well. So, what is a Tudor misconception that you'd love to change? Although I suspect, again, I know the answer.
No, I'm not going to go with that obvious one. So there's another one. So a lot of people always think that she's miserable and depressed and hysterical. I think some famous historian said she looked like an ogre or something, but it's completely wrong. Mary, she was a gamble addict. She would have to go to like special classes or something because she loved to gamble. One occasion she gambled with, I think it was either a friend of hers it must have been a friend of hers, and they gambled her breakfast. She's an addict. It was hilarious.
Well, and maybe she got that after her great grandmother, because I know Margaret Beaufort was a real gambler, and I remember reading a story once that she sent one of the members of her household to represent her because she didn't want to leave the cards table.
Oh, I can imagine that. That's hilarious.
So we're here today, as I said at the start of the episode, to discuss the imagery of Queen Mary I. When people think about images of Queen Mary, I think it's fair to say that just a couple of portraits spring to mind. However, I believe that the actual number of images relating to her is way more, and you've catalogued basically everything. So how many images are we talking about of Mary?
Yeah, so that's the thing. Everyone always thinks about all the Antonis Mor or the Han Jua portraits. And yes, they are obviously the famous ones, but there are so many. So I was counting them up today, actually. So there are, give me one moment. There's about, and we're talking just contemporary here. We're not talking about, later on copies. So in terms of portraiture, there's 65. There's 75 legal images of her. So like on letters, patents, charters, grants. She's on 11 denominations of coinage. She's on 11 types of medals. 4 contemporary stained glass windows. There's a marble bust of her, a statue, an effigy, and 10 head engravings.
Right, so a lot more than 2.
There's a lot more than 2.
So what is the earliest detailed image that we have of Mary? And I'm assuming it's from her childhood. And what can we learn from that image about how she looked?
Yes. So, I think everyone knows about this one. So the earliest image we have of Mary is by the Holland Boots, who came over to England in the 20s. And it's that tiny miniature in the National Portrait Gallery of her as a child, where she wears a little brooch called the Emperor. And basically, it's a marriage. It's a marriage miniature. It's all to do with when she's betrothed to Charles V. One of her long betrothals. She was married. She was betrothed nearly every year, I think. But it's a beautiful. It's the size of your palm. Well, less than that. It shows that the 9-year-old. She's a 9-year-old princess at this point. Betrothed to a 22-year-old. So we can talk about age difference and all that, but it was. And it's a beautiful image, and it's the earliest miniature that we have of her. So that's again, it's really. It's really significant.
Yeah, I know it's in the name, but I'm always stunned by how miniatures actually are. When you actually see them, they are so tiny. And the level of detail they're able to get is remarkable, considering they're working with something very small.
It's ridiculous. I don't know. They were geniuses. They were honest geniuses. And she wears there's a little cross with her, and she wears pearls. Showing her not virginity, because it didn't mean virginity, but purity. It's how pure she's a pure princess. She's on the marriage market. She's ready to get married, and obviously it all just goes crashing down not too long afterwards.
Yes, and I was wanting to ask you about that, which is, were there any images created of Mary around the time of Anne Boleyn's ascendancy and the downfall, effectively, of Mary's mother Catherine? In that window, the sort of the Great Matter years, are there images created of Mary?
Not that I can find. I think we did. Okay. We know Cromwell had a miniature of her in a ring, so there's some images going around. There must have been something. Catherine must have had an image of her somewhere. We do know 1527, there's a marriage treaty between Mary and the Duke of Orleans. So this is just before everything, obviously, Anne Boleyn comes on the scene. It's not a great image. It's just a basic image. She's wearing a basic ermine gown. because it's just a treaty. But that's the closest we have of Mary during the Great Matter and the following years.
You said there about a ring that Cromwell had. I didn't know that. So
Yes.
Is it
It's,
disappeared?
I mean, I only found out. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's in existence anymore, unless someone knows where it is. That'd be, yes, we know Cromwell had a ring which had Mary's portrait in. So it's probably like the Chequers ring, something similar to that. So if anyone knows where this ring is, do let me know.
Why would Cromwell have had that, do you think?
So we know Mary and Cromwell were obviously communicating during this time period. How close they were is up for debate. But we do know Cromwell was trying to help Mary as much as he could. Probably for worse wears. But yeah, I mean, so it must have been some sort of, a proof of their friendship or their need for each other, act of loyalty. But yeah, I mean, I had no idea until, like I said, a couple of months ago, I found this source and they said, oh yeah, Cromwell owned a ring of Mary. It's like, oh,
how interesting. I wonder what happened to it.
I mean, it probably just melted down or given to someone.
Yeah, it could be in a junk shop somewhere.
Yeah, well, you never know with these things. They do pop up every now and again.
Yeah. Have you seen the Chequers ring in the flesh?
I have. I didn't realise how small it was.
That was literally what I was about to say. I saw it a few years ago and I could not believe how tiny it is. I mean, I was trying to describe it to people. The images are almost half the size of your little fingernail. I mean, just so tiny.
I mean, they must have had some real skill and a good eye. Obviously, they use magnification and whatnot, but I mean, I can't do that. Can you? You need a talent for that. You really do. They're gifted.
Very much. So there are a few images of Mary that were depicting her in her 20s, and I'd like to discuss a couple of them. Firstly, I believe that you were actually part of a team that was able to re-identify an image of Mary in her 20s that for a really long time had been labelled as Catherine Parr. So how did you become involved in this? How did you determine that it was actually an image of Mary?
Yeah, so I mean, I have to thank Emma Rutherford and Owen Emerson for this because they brought my attention to this. Yeah, I mean, so it's always been quite debated. I mean, I think originally it was dated as Mary in the 19th century, and then Roy Strong said, no, it's Catherine Parr. So we've sort of stuck with the Catherine Parr attribution. And it's only Emma recently looked at this, looked at the miniature as part of her exhibition. And she said, well, hang on a minute. It's not Catherine Parr. It's, look at the nose, look at the eyes, look at the facial features. I mean, obviously we have to be very careful when saying, oh, it's because it looks like someone, it's definitely that person. We have to be very careful with those sorts of things. But I mean, so as a team, we worked out, right, yes, the facial features look like her. She does have a quite distinct nose. So right, that's a good sign. We know Mary has blue eyes. We know she's, a redhead. That's good. Fashion's late 1540s. But one of the main things was the jewellery she was wearing. So she wears this beautiful cross with the three pearls. And it pays resemblance to other images of Mary with this jewel. The other miniature, for instance, it's quite similar. It's not exactly the same. And we also have this jewel in the big family portrait with Henry and Edward and Jane Seymour, Mary and Elizabeth. Yeah. So there's links with that as well. And, we looked at some of the records and inventories and we realised, oh, Mary does own a cross with pearls and, So it's all of those factors, obviously the fashion as well, looking at the collar, looking at the age of the sitter, so it all adds up. And yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It's, huge congratulations to both of them as well for finding this thing. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's portrait discoveries are always, I think, one of the most exciting things that happen, in the Tudor world. And when you look at it, and as much as, to your point, you said we can't simply say, oh, it looks like her, but equally that is a big thing for us to consider because we've got.
Oh, definitely. I'm guilty of that all the time.
Yeah, and we've got contemporary, very detailed portraits of Catherine Parr. In fact, I would say that of all of Henry VIII's wives, we probably know the most about what Catherine Parr definitely looked like because her portraits are remarkable. And that image doesn't look anything like the woman depicted in the other portraits of Catherine Parr, but it does look a lot like Mary.
No, exactly.
So
I mean, as soon as I saw it, I said, "That's Mary." I said, "Oh, really?" I was like, "Yes." Can you not look at it? Like once you've known a woman quite a long time, you just recognise. You can recognise the feature. And and another interesting thing about this portrait, we know it's by Susanna Horenboot, which was Lucas's sister. But, normally we say it's just Horenboot, but we know it's Susanna because the rest of her family had passed away by this point. So this, now this can then be used as the standard, but then looking at other miniatures and saying, right, now we know Susanna's brushwork. So it will lead on to so many exciting possibilities of working out female artists at the Tudor court.
Yeah, exactly. I think just Horenbout as a name, Horenbout as a name is known, less famous than Holbein, but it's still a big name. But I think a lot of people don't realise that there was a female Horenbout kicking about and that her work was just as good as her brother's.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the Mary, now we think, oh, maybe actually Susanna was the star and Lucas was the,
So the other portrait of Mary in her 20s I wanted to cover is probably one of the best known images of Mary. It's on display at the National Portrait Gallery. It's inscribed that Mary's 27, I believe, at this point. She's very richly apparelled. So was this a portrait painted, do you think, when she's returned to court, she's very much back in favour?
Definitely. I mean, there's a record, and we know Mary paid for this portrait. She paid a Master John £5. So, that's about $5,000 in today's money, roughly. So it's not that expensive, but I mean, I'm sure you've seen the thing. It's a beautiful portrait. It's a lot bigger than I thought as well, actually.
Gorgeous, yeah.
This is Mary saying, "Right, I'm back, everyone. Here I am. I'm the female lead, really, apart from the Queen." It's all about legitimacy. She's saying that she's the daughter of Henry VIII. She's 28 years old. She's ready to get married. She's wearing a beautiful, bodice and gown, and the jewels are wonderful. She's wearing crimson sleeves. She's ready. Where it was, we don't know. I assumed it was in Whitehall. Whether it was in her own apartment or whether it was a gift to her father, sadly, we don't know. Because wherever it was, it obviously symbolises its own meaning. If it was in her father's area, then it's to prove, I'm proud of my daughter. Look out what a good asset she is. If it's in her apartment, it's proving her legitimacy.
The other thing that's quite not unusual, I suppose slightly unusual when we look at Mary's portraiture as a whole, that makes this image slightly unusual in comparison to the others, is that firstly she's wearing a true French hood, which there's always this association obviously with the French hood and Anne Boleyn. But I think firstly this tells us Mary wore them as well, but also her décolletage, so her chest and the going into her shoulders is open. We can see it. And the vast majority of her portraiture, she's much more covered up. So do you think there is a reason why she's been portrayed in that way in this image, or is it just indicative of the fashion of the time?
We'll talk about the open chest bit. That's because she's young and she's not married. She's an eligible princess ready to go on the marriage market. Because we obviously have to remember most of the images that we think of Mary is her as queen. So she's a lot, she's older. She's more mature. She's married. So you won't be having the open gowns. They'll be, closed up for modesty reasons. But yeah, I mean, I didn't realise I only just realised about the French hood connection. So thank you for that. It was just fashion. We have to remember, because Catherine of Aragon did own French hoods as well. She just preferred the English gable. So I think it's it's a fashion thing. It's, she's with the times. She's, ready to party. It's her as a party girl, really. Yeah, let me get married, Dad.
get married.
Yeah,
because she's getting on by this point. For a Tudor to not be married at 27, 28, she is getting on.
Not being funny. We'll get on a bit. Do you want grandchildren or not?
So by the time that we hit Mary's reign, the portraits of her, as best I can tell, they kind of fall into something of a pattern when it comes to what she wears. So we see these high collared dresses, and the collar is almost like a fan, and then the French hood that sort of evolved and has become sort of squared off. Now, again, do you think this was just indicative of changes in fashion, or was this Mary saying, no, this is how I want to be portrayed? Because it does, a bit like the Anne Boleyn portrait collection where there's loads of the B pendant portrait collection, Mary's images have this look to them. Do you think that was quite deliberate, or was it just coincidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of both. Obviously, fashion has evolved by this point, so you do have the more square hood. Mary did own a variety of hoods. She, had Spanish, French hoods. She had gable hoods. When she first met Philip, she wore a gable hood. So she had loads of items. I mean, her council have to write to Philip at one point saying, "Can you please tell the Queen to stop spending money on the wardrobe?" She was a spendaholic. Plus, yeah, so it's more of a statement, because we have to remember, this isn't Mary Tudor. This is Maria Regina. So This is Mary the Queen. She's no longer this mortal princess who's distraught. This is, a queen who's stable in her kingdom. She's top dog. This is how we're going to do it. And obviously then she would then influence everyone else in the court.
I think easily the most famous image of Mary is the 3/4 length portrait of her painted by Antonis Mor. I actually think it's my favourite portrait of Tudor England, because it's so remarkably lifelike. I think we are absolutely seeing Mary as she looked. And you pointed out to me during your talk at Peterborough Cathedral at the Catherine of Aragon Festival, there are a couple of interesting features about this portrait that people might miss. So what am I talking about here?
Yes, no, you're so right. Yeah, I mean, it's. I keep having debates whether it's my favourite one or not, because it is so lifelike. I mean, people comment on how scary it is. It's quite scary, because it is like she's going to come out of the throne.
Yeah.
So it's painted between November and December 1554. So she's happily married. She's at the zenith of her power. She's put down rebellions. So what a lot of people seem to not realise is, if you actually work it right, okay, we know it's made in November and December. Mary's pregnant at this point. I mean, you can't see, the pregnancy as such, but we know she's pregnant. So this is not just Mary as the Queen. This is Mary the mother. It's why she's sitting down. Yes, it is part of Habsburg iconography, but it's not her as a Spanish queen. This is Mary as an independent sovereign who will be the future Queen of Spain, Italy, France, all of, the whole Habsburg Empire.
Mm.
So that's like the main thing. So we know she's pregnant. This is her as a mother queen. But also, so Mor's famous image, which is in the Prado, which belonged to Charles V, is the only contemporary image which has her with her wedding ring. The other copies don't have the wedding ring. Okay. Why is that? Is it because Mary doesn't want the wedding? Was it an omission by Mor's workshop for the English because they don't want to know that Mary's married to Philip? Or is it more Charles V wants her to have this wedding ring on to prove that she's, her and Philip have done the deed? So it's, we don't know whose decision it was, but Mary obviously had she inspired the image. She's there with Mor, discussed. It's naive for us to think that she didn't have any say in how she wants to be portrayed, what to include, what not to include, because she has her coronation ring throughout all of the images. So that's the spousal ring which the monarch gets when they're crowned. So that's her marriage to her country, the mother of her people. And yeah, it's a beautiful image. It's got a beautiful diamond pendant, which isn't the Spanish one. It's actually part of the English crown jewels. So it's all about Mary, the English queen, mother of her people, the goddess, sort of, it's just such a powerful image. And like you said, it's so lifelike. I mean, it was unheard of. That's why the court was shocked when they first saw the thing, because I thought, oh, okay, right. Wow. Because portraits, they serve as surrogates when they're not in residence. That you have a portrait there to say, still, show that they're still there and they're in charge. Yeah. So to have a lifelike image is, it must have freaked them out.
Well, another thing about it that I hadn't ever noticed, because you said a couple of minutes ago that some people think that the image is she looks quite stern and quite scary. I've often wondered, is it because she's basically got no eyebrows? Portrait. But you pointed something out to me, which is absolutely there if you look hard enough, is that she's smiling.
Yeah. No, you have to, obviously you have to like zoom into it really quite a lot. But yeah, she's the only Tudor to smile in her portraits. Now, that doesn't sound like a queen who's always depressed, does it? He's enjoying it.
Yeah, and I hadn't ever noticed it until you pointed it out. But when you do zoom in, yes, you can actually see. It's a bit like the Mona Lisa. There is a smile there. It's just, it's not, it's not a Richter's grin, but she can definitely tell she's smiling.
Yeah, it's that sort of, you're trying to get behind the curtain of who she is. There's a slight little gap saying, oh, yeah, I'm still that playful princess. I still like gambling, like running around, hunting and all that sort of stuff. I'm still that person. But now I have to be, now it's the serious job. I'm the queen.
You said something a couple of minutes ago that some people listening might have, if they're listening to it in the car, they might have gone into a ditch or fallen off their chair, which was that Mary was pregnant. Because history tells us that she wasn't ever pregnant and that she had a case of pseudocyesis, so a false pregnancy, and then the second time probably the cancer that eventually killed her. But you disagree with the first point. You think she genuinely did have a pregnancy that ended in a miscarriage. So what makes you so convinced of that, and that she did genuinely fall pregnant at one point?
Yeah. So the first thing is, we, as historians, we shouldn't be putting one camp or the other. We're not there. We'll never know what really happened. This whole phantom pregnancy, we do know, sadly, is a real thing, but we can't just assume that it was, because we're not there. We can't test her. Everyone thought she was pregnant. Simon Renard, the imperial ambassador, told Charles in September, the doctors think she's pregnant. John Mason, who's the English ambassador in Brussels, again says, she's getting bigger, so she has to have new clothes. The signs were undeniable. The 19th of September, there's more like Bishop de Granvelle, who's one of Charles's leading ministers. They're all talking about how she's suffering from morning sickness. Okay. October, it's become public knowledge. Everyone's talking about it. One of Philip's close friends tells Charles's private secretary that the pregnancy will put a stop to every difficulty, because it would. This child wouldn't have just inherited England. It would have cemented Mary's rule, and this child would have become, Philip's successor as King of Spain eventually.
Yeah.
Because obviously Don Carlos does pass away. So Mary thought she was. Cardinal Pole thought she was. Everyone thought she was pregnant. All of the court's ready for this birth. I mean, the cradle is made. It's engraved. And it says, "The child which vow to Mary, O Lord of Might, has send to England's joy and health preserve, keep and defend." So obviously Mary goes into confinement at Hampton Court, which a lot of people don't know. But apparently she wanted to go to Windsor. She wanted to give birth at Windsor Castle. Right. Why she went to Hampton Court, I assume it's delays or travel. There was obviously a reason for it. So she goes to Hampton Court. She's obviously confined, but she always people are still visiting her. She's still talking to people all the time. She's shown her stomach to everyone. Everyone's, saying, "Oh, it's not long now, not long now." On the 30th of April, news is leaked that she's given birth to a prince. Everyone's, fantastic. This is great news. The shops are closed, bonfires are lit. The ambassadors quickly dispatch their things. Everyone in Europe knows by May. There was talk that, maybe it's not quite what it is, but even Henri II, there was no love lost between her and Mary and Henri. Even he says, "No, we know she's pregnant. It's probably just taking a bit more time."
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about it. However, her enemies do start to swirl around her. A spinster called Alice Perwish, I think that's how you pronounce her name, whose late husband was a merchant tailor, claimed on March that a child would be brought. It'd be a secret child. It actually it happens. A couple of 100 years later, doesn't it? With James II, there's these rumors say that there's going to be a child sneaks in. She's pardoned. Someone else says Mary gave birth to a monkey. It's like, okay. But then in the springtime, there's talk that goes round, and people are starting to say that she's given birth to a lump of flesh. Even John Fox starts to think, oh, well, like later on, he writes that he thinks she had a miscarriage. If we,
and he hated her, so
yeah.
And,
if we take the term lump of flesh, or some people said that she gave birth to a mole, well, those terms are actually terms used to describe a miscarriage.
Yeah, we're not talking about the underground things that look a bit like rats.
We're not talking. No, we're not. No, I mean there was an article somewhere. It was a couple of months ago, and they were talking about this, and they had a picture of a mole, and I nearly had to tear the friend up. We know it's not. It's not a mole. It's what they used to call miscarriages. Right. So the ambassadors are saying, why is she suddenly being very recluse? Because at this, before all this, she was showing everyone her stomach. She was having visitors in daily. But in the springtime, she suddenly hides away from court. No one sees her. No one's allowed in. It just something clearly happened in the springtime. I mean, and there's always a bit of truth in rumor. Did she have it? I've always thought that she had a miscarriage, because we can't say that she's just made this whole thing up or she's been mistaken, because surely if it wasn't, surely someone would have known, or asked her, are you sure? Is this actually? Why make a big thing about it? And then suddenly, everyone's shut down. She hides away. No one sees her, for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then she just, without any announcement, all the baby stuff is removed, and she leaves Hampton Court on the flimsy excuse that it needs cleaning. Well, it doesn't. It probably did need cleaning, but it didn't warrant everyone moving. She just left quietly, no fuss. So, I think she had a miscarriage, which is, it's terrible. Especially, could you imagine you waited all this time to finally do your job, your divine right, and the reason why no one's, why she's never confirmed anything is, well, we know what happens to queens who miscarry. I mean, look at Anne Boleyn. She miscarried, and look what happened to her. Obviously, Mary's the queen, so she's not going to kill herself. But the embarrassment. I think she probably thought it's better not to say anything, and we'll just, never explain, never complain. We'll just carry on as normal. Because if I start saying I've had a miscarriage, then people are going to say you're a failure. Whereas if I just say, oh, maybe I was just mistaken, because it wasn't obviously just her mistaken, everyone else also looks like idiots as well. If they all say, oh, we were all just mistaken, because it's not just her, everyone's to blame for this. Whereas, the truth is, sadly, she lost that child.
So Mary's half-sister, Elizabeth, is famous for using portraiture to convey messages from a PR perspective. She created this almost timeless image of herself, which also means that, unfortunately, Elizabeth's portraiture is a lot more subject to, did she look like this? Whereas Mary's... So do you think that Mary did any of this? To me, her portraits, they feel realer, they feel more authentic and accurate to how she looked. But did she use her images to convey messages and create an image of herself in the way that her sister did?
Yeah, I mean, yes, hers are more realistic, but I think that's the point. Because up to this point, they were quite, I don't want to say English style, because it wasn't English style, but, they were very much PR move, that famous one of her father. He didn't look like that when it was painted. It was completely opposite. But Mary could use her physical, her resemblance. And actually, I mean, all of her portraits have messages in. If you actually spend time looking at them, you can't just walk past the thing and say, oh, that's a nice one, and carry on. You've got to really look into it. And, like I said with the Mor one, she's pregnant. You can look at the smile. You can see so much symbolism in that one. I mean, Ewer's one.
And you can see a slight bump actually in the Mor portrait.
Yeah, there's a slight one in the Mor one. The later Ewer one, which is painted within 57 to 58, she shows you have to look quite closely, but she's wearing a very loose gown, and it's a bit unbuttoned, and you can see that she's obviously swelling. Obviously, sadly, we think that's the cancer that eventually killed her.
Which portrait's that? Sorry.
So it's Ewer. There's a famous one where she's standing up by a table, her hands on a golden cloth. She's wearing a very Spanish gown. It matches Philip's one by Titian.
Oh, the one
she
with
wears a black and white
brown
one.
furry collar to it.
Yeah,
I know the one you mean.
Yeah, so you got the version of the brown fur, but you've also had one where she's wearing this beautiful gold collar.
Okay, I think I know the one you mean. But yeah, I'll have to Google it afterwards.
Yeah, no, she's wearing a lovely black and white gown, a green background.
So, do you think Mary's personality comes across in any of her images? People have this perception, we sort of touched on it a bit earlier, that she's very stern and severe, but based on what you said about her gambling and everything, that image of a woman that's stern is not quite accurate to the woman that you think Mary was.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only one that sort of hints at her personality is also obviously the Moor one, with that slight smirk. Yeah, because obviously you have to remember that these portraits aren't for the general public. These are meant to all be political messages. You know, this is Mary the Queen, not Mary the woman. You know, Mary the woman and Mary the Queen are two very separate people. It's, you know, the whole body and crown politic. You know, who is the crown? Is it the woman, or is it, you know, the idea and, you know, her essence, the thing inside her. So I don't think her personality really comes out. I mean, if she'd lived longer and she had more portraits done, maybe they would have, you know, started to have more personality to them, I guess, or show hints of who she was. But I mean, she was a very private person, really. She didn't tell anyone what she really thought, because she couldn't. It's too dangerous to do that. You know, you've got to be very careful with what you say and who you say it to. And I mean, she had enemies everywhere. You know, she couldn't trust half of her privy council.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the problem for her, wasn't it? And the other big thing, obviously, that happens during her time as queen is that she marries Philip of Spain. Once she does, there are going to be images created of the two of them, and the most well-known is a jewel portrait from Woburn Abbey. And people will probably know it. It's the one, like, you know, there's lots of gold. Mary sat on a chair. There's lots of gold in the background. Do you know if this image is painted from life? And I believe you've also got a theory about the fact that Philip may have been painted differently at the start of when the image was being designed.
Yeah, so this portrait was painted in 1558. We know that because of the inscription in the portrait. You know, it just says Mary and Philip, King, Queen of England, Spain, Ireland, all of that. Yeah, this is a marriage. You know, it's a marriage portrait showing the King and Queen as one dual monarchy, like Ferdinand and Isabella. They always say it's after Moor. I mean, just because she's wearing the same type of gown doesn't mean that it's after Moor, because it's not. You know, it's not. Yeah, she sits down, but she's wearing different clothing. It's different. So what? I'm going to ask you a question here, Adam. What kind of gown do you think she's wearing in it, if you remember?
It's brown, isn't it?
No.
Philip. I'm going to have to look it up. It's black. Black with gold underneath.
What would you say? Have you seen it in real life?
No.
No. Oh, well, I must go and take you. It's actually dark blue.
Okay.
Yeah. So it obviously changes everything about what we know. So it's not her dressed as a Spanish queen. It's her as an English queen, because her personal colour was blue. So it's all about her being, you know, like the Virgin Mary, I guess. It's all about Mary. So, yes, the question you were saying about Philip's stodgy legs, and everyone's been debating over this. Is it just a bad artist? Is it just a bad copy, a pattern? You know, why is it? Maybe it's meant to be hung up quite high up, so when you look at it, it doesn't look as bad. So when I saw it, I thought there's something strange going on here. So if you have to use your imagination a bit, but where he's standing next to his throne, if you moved the throne behind him, he'd be sitting down. Now, that's where the issue is. So the artist obviously realised, well, if we have the king sitting down as well, then it's a power dynamic. There's a power struggle going on here. We can't have him sitting down because she's the queen. He's the king, but it's, you know, his position's very much debated. You know, how much of a king was he? You know, they were a dual monarchy. You know, he was Philip I of England. So somewhere down the line, they decided, right, we've already done the initial drawings. You know, we can't change it now. So we'll just have him standing and hope no one notices. But obviously, we've now noticed.
Well, Yeah, I mean, I'd never noticed it until you pointed it out to me, but when you look at it, it actually does make so much sense. His legs are in the shape they would be if he was sat down.
Yeah, they're in the bent position, aren't they?
Yeah.
So the reason they've had him standing is because obviously you have to stand in front of your monarch. The monarch sits down first. So by him standing, it shows that he's he's not he's not quite her equal.
Yes.
Well, in the English context, anyway. If this painting was in Spain or in Europe, it obviously be completely different. But this is an English context; it's for an English audience. And Mary's sitting down; she's the queen. Philip's her junior partner. For all argument's sake, that's why he's standing up. But obviously, he has that very dodgy posture.
The other thing about this image as well that I think it conveys more than any other portrait of Mary is how petite she was, because it's quite well documented, isn't it, that she was tiny.
Yeah.
She was very petite. And this portrait really shows that, I think.
Yeah, she was tiny. Yes, it shows how thin she was as well, because everyone comments about how thin she was and, how she survived. Everyone was like, how she managed. She's so thin. I mean, she's sort of anorexic, really, and she's so pale as well. Yeah, I mean, I never really realised that until now. Yeah, you can see how petite she was. I mean, she was only, I think she was about 5 foot something. She was tiny, absolutely tiny. If you look at her wooden effigy, which is made after her death, it's meant to be life size. So I think she was just a bit taller than the late Elizabeth II, just a bit taller. So so you can imagine. But she had such a manly voice. That's one of the things they talked about her. So you can it's sort of like a Miss Trunchbull sort of thing. This small lady syndrome, I guess. You've got to go in there and you're bellowing, trying to get attention.
Yeah, I remember reading that she had a booming, very commanding voice, and that actually, quite hilariously, Henry VIII, by all accounts, had not a high-pitched voice, but a higher-pitched voice than you would have expected.
Oh, I didn't know that. How?
Yeah, I remember reading that somewhere, that it was, he actually had, relative to what you would imagine, he had quite a high-pitched voice.
Yeah, no, I think it's trying to show her regality. I mean, in the film Lady Jane, that's how I see Mary. Jane, is it Lapertoire? She's
Jane Lapertere.
Lapertere, thank you.
Yeah.
That's how I see Mary. She knows she's regal. She is God's divine ruler. It's that essence of majesty. It flows right through her, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's a fantastic film, actually.
It's really good.
Very good portrayal of Mary in that.
Are there any portraits of Mary that you really dislike?
That's a very good question. The contemporary ones were actually quite nice. It's when you get the posthumous ones. Let me think about. Yes.
There's that one where she's in a red dress that she looks quite evil.
Oh yes, yes, that one, Petworth one. Yes,
Petworth.
She looks like Devil Incarnate, doesn't she? In that one, it's very evil.
If you actually look at it, she looks a bit like, when the Grinch smiles in. She's kind of got that look to her face in the Petworth portrait.
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, I never liked that one anyway. Yeah, so there's that one. I mean, there's one in France, in Versailles, where she looks a bit like Death, actually. It's not a nice one. It's not a nice one at all. She's got very swollen cheeks, and you can see all her cheekbones and everything. But then I guess it sort of does show her. I mean, it looks like she's quite ill, actually, in this one. A large forehead. She's like grimacing.
Yeah.
So there's that one. Yeah, obviously the Petworth one, which is, it's not too bad. I mean, at least she smiles in this one, even though it's a bit like the Grange. But no, there is actually. So yeah, most of the contemporary ones are quite, they're okay. But the worst posthumous one.
Yeah. And
I must find it for you because I mean it's so bad, it's funny. I mean, I just get angry with it. I think it's 17th or 18th century. It's basically her as a man. They've painted her as a man, and it's absolutely, it's just awful. It really is. I mean, I could not believe the thing when I saw it. It's just, but it's obviously it's trying to prove a point. It's when they, obviously it's very Protestant England back by then, and you can't have a Catholic queen looking nice, so we're going to
Yeah.
make her look as ugly and as decrepit as possible. And what best way to do that than to portray her as a man or like an ogre sort of thing? It's really bad. I mean, it's just awful. So yeah, I mean, I'll send it over to
Send me that, and I'll when I share this, I'll make sure people, because people are going to be wondering what the hell is he talking about. So send me that, and I'll add it to my post on Instagram so we can see Mary the man.
Yeah, honestly, it is. When you look at it, you just think, how have you done? Like, we know what she looked like. We've got enough images. How can you? So it's obviously done. It's done on purpose.
Yeah, done to malign her. So obviously coinage is another big part of the imagery around Mary, and we have lots of examples of coins from her reign. You showed me some in the flesh when we met at Peterborough Cathedral a couple of weeks ago. So can you describe a couple of these coins for me?
Yes, I can. It's show and tell now. So yes, so one of Mary's first policies is to revamp the coinage, restructure, have the coinage what it should be, because also we have to remember during Edward and Henry's reign of debasement policies. So for people who don't know what that means, it's basically they reduced the value of the coinage. So a shilling wasn't a shilling. It had, bits of copper and other bad metals in it, really. That's why a lot of Henry's later coinage, if you can see his face starts to rub and it goes green and brown. But that's obviously because they only have a tiny amount of silver and then the rest is copper. But they're trying to make it out as a real silver shilling. So Mary's first act is to, right, we're going to bring all the bad coinage in, melt it down, and have the correct standard. And yeah, so Mary's coinage on the groats, which is 4p, it's your common coin, which everyone's going to be dealing with. There's two images of her. There's one when she's first queen in 53 to 54. This is before she's married Philip, and she looks like a Roman goddess. It's like a Roman empress. It's a Roman empress, really. That's how I describe it. It's very imperial looking. It's not very lifelike.
Yeah, it almost looks a bit like Queen Victoria as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw the thing, I thought, hang on a moment, this is very Victorian looking, isn't it? So it's and I think maybe this is where it all starts. The whole female iconography on coinage, really, because she's the first English woman to be on a coin. So the Mint's obviously trying to work out how do we best present this. Oh, let's just follow the Romans. Let's do her as a Roman empress. So we have that one, and then obviously we get once she's married Philip, the coinage has to change, and there's a lot of arguments over how how do you portray the king? Do you include him at all? If so, where? So in the groats, they include his name, but they don't. There's no effigy of him. He's not involved in it. I mean, you were saying when you saw it, you said she looks younger in it, really. And obviously it's more lifelike, but she looks younger in it, which I found,
the earlier one, which looks a bit like Queen Victoria, she looks like a woman in her 60s. And then the one that's later, she looks like a woman in her 20s. It's just totally different. Yeah.
So there's obviously a move to humanize her, make her look more human. But what's interesting is Philip's not included on these lower denominations. So he's not on the pennies, he's not on the groats, he's only on the shillings and the sixpence. So these are coins which would be, I mean, I call them traders' coins, market coins, because these are where the markets are going to be going, and they'll be trading with Europe. Obviously, he's king of a lot of lands in Europe, so they're expecting, Antwerp and Ghent and those sorts of places are expecting to see him on it. So so he's on those two, but he's not on the gold coinage either. So to have the king, I mean, he's mentioned on it, but there's no image of him. So it's interesting to know that the very rich and the nobility don't have him on the coins, and the very poor don't have him on the coins. It's these middlemen. It's too early to say middle sort, but it's that sort of middle classes. They're the only ones seeing the king on it. But it's not just English coinage she's on. So the European version, so it's called a jeton. It's not really a coin as such. It's a device used to help like accounts and whatnot, count their finances, keep track on things. But it was designed by Jacopo di Trezzo, who was a medalist, and he worked with Philip quite a lot. And obviously it's Flanders, so it's Philip's domains. So obviously he's like the dominant figure on it. But it's very much, it's like the shillings. So D'Atrezzo also made the shillings and sixpences, so he's involved with that, the English coinage as well. What's interesting though is that in 1557, Mary's effigy's on it, but her name isn't on it. Which I thought, oh, wow, that's a bit strange. It's like the reverse of the English, really. You know, she's on it, but she's not going to be named. And that's from 1557. But I recently saw one from 1558, and it does have her name on it. So someone down the line has realised their mistake or their omission, and they thought, oh, actually, we should include the Queen's name on it as well, because, you know, she is the Queen of Spain and Europe at this time as well. You know, she's not just Queen of England. She's everything her father never was, which was an empress.
Yeah, and I'd never considered that until you pointed it out to me. But in a way, it kind of, if we look at who was arguably the most powerful Tudor during their reign, it could be argued it is Mary, because she has this title that the others don't have.
Yeah. I mean, she was Queen of half of Europe and America.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, she didn't interfere with the politics as much, if at all, because, well, one, she's too busy dealing with English affairs, because it's a right mess, to be frank. You know, if she'd lived longer and had more time, maybe she would have started, you know, talking to Philip more about other lands. You know, because I think if she'd been more secure and safe, and she'd had lots of children who were, you know, at a good age, then she may well have gone with Philip and travelled around Europe and seen Spain, you know, seen her mother's country and everything.
Yeah.
But, you know, sadly, history just didn't allow it.
Well, that's, I think, the biggest problem for Mary was the lack of time. You know, she came to the throne at an advanced stage by the standards of the time, and she reigns for 5 years, so she doesn't have the longevity to actually really establish a lot of, to your point, I'm sure there were just so many more things she wanted to do, but sadly she was unable.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you just look at her will, there's so many things she's got planned, but she knows she's not going to have time to do it. I mean, everyone always asks me, why didn't she move Catherine when she was queen? I said, well, she just didn't have time. She wanted to. She had this big plan for, I mean, I think she knew she was going to go to Westminster Abbey. She said, you know, wherever I'm buried, I want my mum to come and join me, and I want a beautiful monument to us both where we can lay in rest. Obviously, Elizabeth just completely ignored it. To Peterborough's gain, but
yeah, I think Mary's burial is actually atrocious. Really, the fact that she's all right. The sisters brought together back in death. I can see there's a nice quality to that, but it's just the sheer lack of mention of Mary. I mean, you really have to look pretty hard to find the little plaque that tells you she's even in there.
Yeah, I mean, I hate it. I really do.
Yeah.
I mean, I always, when I go in there, I always leave a pomegranate, and I sit there and I just watch, and I see how many tourists actually realise who's there. Oh, this is the tomb of Elizabeth.
And Mary.
You know, her sister. And Mary, her sister's there as well. What, you mean Mary, Queen of Scots? No, her sister. Oh, you mean B. Mary? I won't say the word, because I refuse to acknowledge it. Yes, that Mary, the one who's very nice to her people, who actually goes and visits the poor in disguise, which is another thing. No one remembers it. It's such a funny episode. So just to remind your viewers, I think it's 1556, 1557, because she's gone to visit Cardinal Pole in Croydon, as you do. And Mary and her ladies-in-waiting, including Jane Dormer, who later recounts this tale, they do the first royal walkabout, basically. She goes round visiting the poor in disguise. So the poor people, they don't know who she is, that she's just a lady of the Queen. That's how she addresses herself. And they go and visit these people. She gives apprentices to boys and girls, to large families, you know, because she wants to help them out. And she asks them questions about, how's the kingdom doing? How are you doing? You know, it's great PR. And she shares meals with them. So, you know, she's not eating, you know, courtly food. She's eating day-to-day food. You know, so it's very humbling her, really. And
wasn't there a situation where someone wasn't being paid correctly?
Yes. So on one particular occasion, when she's in Croydon, she visits a coaler. So it's someone who like, deals with coal for the palace, and she talks to him and his wife, and they say, "Oh, it's lovely having the Queen and all this, but her men haven't paid us." And I think it's been like 1 or 2 months, and they hadn't been paid. And said, "Oh, now we are starting to struggle." And Mary goes, "What do you mean you've not been paid?" "Yes, madam. The Queen's men haven't paid us." "Right. If this is true, go to the palace gates in the morning, and you will see I will talk to the Queen on your behalf, and payment will be ready for you." Anyway, they say, "Oh, no, thank you, madam. We lovely. Thank you. Please talk to the Queen on our behalf." Anyway, Mary then goes back to the palace. She demands that her comptroller, so the guy who's in charge of this, Rochester, he comes over and she says, "How dare you not pay these good men of England? These are hard-working men. They're keeping the palace going, and you've not paid them for months. This is disgraceful." Anyway, Rochester says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, madam. It must have..." Obviously, he's blaming someone else. He says, "Something must have happened in communication, or it won't happen again." And Mary says, "No, it better not. Otherwise, you might have to reconsider your position." Anyway, she storms off, and Rochester then turns to Jane Dormer and says, "How did she know we hadn't paid them?" And she says, "Well, she went and asked them." "What do you mean she went and asked them?" "Well, she's the Queen. She can do what she likes." She went and visited her people and found, it was like undercover boss. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
So, we don't know.
I love that.
Yeah,
though.
we don't know. I hope the poor man did get paid. It'd be hilarious. He turns up, finds all, his wages, looks at the coin and thinks, oh my gosh, that woman who we spoke to yesterday, the coin, it must have shocked them.
Oh, I love that though. I think that's such a cool story. I think that tells you so much about her.
Oh, definitely. She was very kind.
I just wanted to briefly touch on with coinage again, and actually, I suppose in portraiture, how did artists convey in situations where both Mary and Philip are represented? How did artists convey that Mary was ultimately, the buck stopped with Mary, that she was the English monarch?
Yeah. So the best way of looking at this is through the legal documents, because you can literally have a day by day, and you can see how the image changes. So when they're first married, the first legal image of it's Michaelmas term 1554, they're both individually crowned. They're both sitting on robes of estate, and they're both king and queen. Mary's on the dominant side of the image, which is our left. They're right, our left, when you're looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
So she's on the dominant side, and she stays on the dominant side until 1556, and the roles are suddenly reversed, and Philip's now on the left. And this, everyone's always then said, "Oh, this is to prove that he's now in charge," and da-da. Well, no, because Mary, throughout all of these legal documents, always holds the scepter and the orb. Philip holds a sword. And people have said, "Oh, the sword shows that he's a military, he's a military monarch." Well, yes, he's the military leader because he's the man. That's his job. He's meant to be the defender. She's the queen. She's got the crown jewels on her. They share. There's a floating crown above them. But what's interesting is that this image, the first image of this is November 1556. About a week later, in a local charter in Chichester, the roles have reversed again. So it's not a straightforward, right now Philip's on the dominant side. Well, it might be for the legal documents in London, but the localities they're not having that. They keep Mary on the left, on the dominant side. So it then gets very wishy-washy, and there's loads of arguments in 1555 saying, "Oh, how do we include the king? Do we include him at all?" Like, there's a couple of charters where it's just him on it, and Mary's squashed in her name. So obviously Philip's name comes first, so he's in the big P, and then Mary's squashed in the M. Obviously that didn't go down well because there's only 2 examples of that in 1555. Yeah, so that's how, there's loads of conversations going on about how to include Philip and Mary.
Yep.
The most important, I guess, is the Great Seal. So that's the document, that's the device used to authenticate all legal documents. It's that is the monarch's power. That is the clavis regni, we like to say. So there's loads of conversations about how do we include Philip after 1554, because obviously it's just Mary. Everyone always says that after marriage, a new seal's made and Philip's on it, which is then when we see this joint image of them. Well, that's not true. Because in my research, obviously I've been going literally month by month, if not week by week, and the Privy Council don't even start discussing this problem until the summer of 1555, where they say, oh, maybe we should actually include the king on this. It then gets left for a year. In June 1556, it then gets brought up again in the council, and they say, right, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to include the king. We're going to pay the guys responsible. I think it's £30 or something, for them to make the device. It's the silver device to use, which they can then be used to make the wax seals. It's not until January 1557 that the actual thing's used. So Philip's the second seal's only in production for less than 18 months, if that. Which is, I mean, it blows everyone's arguments apart, because this whole idea of them having a joint seal straight away, well, it's wrong. It doesn't happen. And there are concerns, and you can imagine the conversations in the Privy Council. How do you include them? Where do you include them? You know, what sort of, because it means so much, and obviously a lot of people are going to be seeing this seal because it's on all documentation. You know, for grants, charters, liberties, you know, the whole lot. So there's a lot of to and fro, of how do you include him, and the fact he's only on it for less than 2 years. Well, it's just over a year, really. Suggests something. And I say just over a year because there's a drawing in the British Museum which is dated 1558, and it's of a new seal. We think it's designed by Jack Strom-Henlink, who's a seal engraver for Philip, actually. And it's just got Mary on it. There's no mention of Philip, or Philip's not on it. It's a beautiful drawing. So there's obviously conversations in the final year. Oh, maybe we should just have Mary back on it because Philip's not in the country anymore. You don't need to have him on it. We don't know if this film was made. I've not found any examples of it, but it's very similar to what Elizabeth uses in the first few years of her reign. And we know this drawing's Mary, not Elizabeth, because it's Mary's wearing the famous cross and diamond pendant, which obviously Elizabeth doesn't use.
Okay, so that's what enables you to confirm it's Mary and not Elizabeth, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay, so my final question for you is, I suppose, a bit of a what if, but what discovery relating to Mary's imagery would you love to unearth? Is there something that you know existed that has vanished, or is there something that you would love to uncover?
I was thinking about this a lot, actually. I mean, it's not a boring answer, really, but I would love to actually see, find if there's a receipt or something, to actually see the process of how does this actually work. Are there any preparation, are there any drawings of Mor and Ewolf, of the Queen's facial features and that, that sort of thing. So there's that, but I'd also like to, see like a receipt or something saying, here to Master Mor, Master Ewolf, here's, whatever, how much, how many pounds or whatever currency they wanted to use. This is how much we're paying you on this date, because then it would confirm the date of the portraits, because, and that, scientific analysis can only give you a range date. It can't tell you, right, it was done on the 30th of September or something. Because
yeah, we can age wood, but we age it to an era, not a specific year even.
So I'd love to find some record of saying, right, this is when this portrait was made. It's like, right, now we've got us talking about it. Now we can work it out, what this portrait means and where it's going. Because we know she had a portrait made by the 30th of September, 1553, because the ambassadors talk about it. Now, whether or not that's Ewolf's famous one, the first standing, we don't know. Because I think it's inscribed 1554 on the actual painting, so it can't be that one. So there's this lost image of potential lost image of Mary from the first 6 months of her reign. So it'd be lovely to know what that image was.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your favourite subject, Mary herself, all of the different images of her. This has been so fascinating. So what are you up to at the moment? What are you working on at the moment, if you're allowed to say that is?
Yes, well, there's no harm in it. So I'm currently trying to convert the theses into a book. No time frame as of yet, but hopefully it's going to have loads of pretty pictures that you've not seen before, because I'm sick to death seeing the same 2 or 3 images all the time. I mean, they are beautiful, but when you know there's so many more that you could use, which can tell different stories and whatnot. Yes, I'm working on that. There's a few articles underway, but yeah, I'm just busy writing and editing, really.
Nice. And where can people find you on social media?
Yes, so you can find me on X/Twitter, Instagram.
Is it just Dr. Peter Stiffell? What's your handle?
So that's a good question. Twitter, for X, it's p.stiffell or p.stiffell, but just write Peter Stiffell and it'll come up. Instagram, it's p.stiffell 1997.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you again so much for coming on for a chat, and we will no doubt speak soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
That brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Tudor Chess Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to Dr. Peter Stiffell for coming onto the show to discuss Queen Mary I's imagery with me. If you have any suggestions for future podcast episodes, please do reach out to me via Instagram. I would love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening to the Tudor Chess Podcast, and speak soon.